Hello, this is the voice of Stewart Pearce, and welcome to my series of deep dialogues. These are vital conversations I engage in with global soul stewards from all over the planet, providing us with vital understandings about how we can create a new hierarchy of values to help us evolve into a brave new world. I hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening.
Namaste, beacons of light. How wonderful to be with you. And of course, you see this wonderful gentleman sitting here, Phillip Mountrose. Yeah, normally we hear Montrose, but here we are, Mr. Mountrose, who is absolutely wonderful. We've already started jiving. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, Deborah, welcome, Stacey, welcome, Marianne. I know lots of people will be pouring in as we go through. And I'll be checking on your chat box comments as we go through. So please feel free as we move towards the latter part of our conversation. I'll indicate when time is present. Don't forget to ask questions, anything that comes up from our wonderful deep dialogue. So let me introduce this wonderful, beautiful man sitting in front of us so that you know who he is. Phillip Mountrose and his wife Jane are holistic coaches, energy healers, innovative authors in the realm of spiritual healing. Together, they have written numerous books, including their latest, The Loving Power of the Soul, a guidebook for realizing your true potential. Their gifts have been collated into the Awakenings Institute as a non-profit which facilitates the unique gifts that each individual brings and are curated with love, honor, and respect. Indeed, they nurture all as their gifts blossom. Phillip, welcome. It's lovely to have you here. And so tell us a little bit about The Loving Power of the Soul, your recent book.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's an honor, Stewart, and I love what you're doing. I love the idea of deep dialogues more than an interview, too, especially with someone like yourself. So the power of the soul, that's something that sort of dawned on us years ago, my wife and myself, when I'm talking about we, just so people wonder who we are. We were led to awakening sort of through a Gurdjieff-Ouspensky group many years ago in the 1970s. Some people know about the spiritual teacher Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. And that group was very wonderful, and it helped us what they called self-remember, which is another term for awakening there. But what we realized that there was a really key missing element in this group, and that was the healing part, and that's part of the soul too. And once we left that group, we started to look into healing, because we realized there was a lot of wounding and problems and repression because people weren't dealing with emotions and issues and blockages. And that led us into finding energetic healings, and the soul became a way of connecting with that. And we found some teachers years ago who taught us how to, what they called Soul Center. We adapted it and now use this different ways to directly and easily connect with your soul. Some people think that's something you just do at a wonderful heightened moment, like looking at a sunset or sunrise, or a beautiful moment, or a heightened crisis. You feel very alive and present. But actually, as probably most of the audience knows, you can do it at any moment. We've just found a lot of simple, easy ways to connect consciously. And it can be sort of a short meditation at first, but then it develops more easily in a way of life to follow that for your purpose and your life plan.
Wow. How nice. So could you just go back and give us a little bit of definition around Ouspensky and Gurdjieff? Because there are many people listening in, and welcome all of those people who have come forth, Julie and Ange and Dawn and Corey and Stephen and Judy and Dawn and Dan. Welcome, everybody. Could you perhaps give us just context of how significant Gurdjieff and Ouspensky were, the wonderful and extraordinary sort of hot pot that they bubbled out of during the latter part of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th.
Right. And there are different, what they called schools. They called it a fourth way where you could awaken. They called it self-remembering, remembering yourself here, listening and being present to your senses while being aware of that, witnessing it. So everyone watching this, if they're aware that they're watching and listening to deep dialogues, they are self-remembering, they are awakened and witnessing. And so that was his fourth way. And something that a powerful...
But who were they?
Well, he was a sage in the 1900s from, I think, Armenia, and traveled around Eastern Europe. And Ouspensky, who was a Russian philosopher and scientist, met him and started studying with him and developed their schools of philosophy. And later on, other people became their students and opened their own schools. And this happened to me when in the United States, in California, in the 1970s. There was another school that I met, and it was one of the better things I could find in the 1970s. There's a lot more available now through the internet today, but at the time, that was one of the best things I could find, even though it had some serious limitations too.
Wow. Yeah, and so we're really talking about the fervor that was happening in human intelligence towards the latter part of the 19th century, and how, of course, alongside the spiritualist movement and the extraordinary work, the Theosophical Society of Madame Blavatsky, along came Gurdjieff and met this wonderful Russian. I always reminded of the combination of Shams and Rumi, and they had these extraordinary, one was a teacher, one was a student, and they had this extraordinary relationship. And their teachings became broadcast all over the world. Thank you for giving us context, because that was a time of immense fervor, wasn't it, in terms of awakening spirituality, and that our heritage, your heritage, my heritage, our heritage, has really been based on that awakening of lineage. And so at the core of it, as you were saying, is this idea and this experience of soul remembering. What do you feel the soul is?
The soul is an eternal part, a part that goes from lifetime to lifetime and beyond, and connects with our higher soul. And then we get oversoul, and there's these collectives that I think go up to an avatar or Atman or universal soul. I've kind of traced mine to a laughing Buddha lineage, and that's connected with one in the source. So you keep going, the farther up you go, the pinnacle, the mountain, the more you are connected to source and oneness. And then interestingly, once you're at this pinnacle, you're actually connected with everything and everyone and interconnected. But the soul is sort of that divine emissary or agent from that higher realm that goes from lifetime to lifetime, and seems to have many multi-dimensional, multi-aspects that are going on right now in this moment for you, me, and everyone.
Wow. Are we within soul, or is soul within us?
Like a lot of metaphysical questions, the answer is both and more.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because
it is. It's
the development of our own personal solidarity of purpose means that our egos have become somewhat inflated. And of course, we know that our societies in the West have produced this very competitive element to our lives of doing, achieving, making money. And so we become very egoic. And as a result of that, when we have a spiritual awakening, which of course you and I know, generally speaking, starts with challenge, the long dark night of the soul, whether it's physical, emotional, or transcendental. And we are shaken, and we begin to discover that there is such a thing as essence, which I believe is what we're talking about in terms of soul, an emanation of light from source. And then we begin to realize, well, it's within me, rather than when I'm actually within the soul. So it is both. But it's an interesting point of differential, isn't it?
Right. I think as you awaken, you realize you're within the soul as the veil starts to lift, that you're just one part of a much bigger movement and collective. While we're more, quote, asleep, we think we are everything in our life and our physicality and our survival is everything. But then we start to see the bigger picture and the veil lifts.
And then the neurosis of separation begins to...
We can have some of that while we're along. That's why you need the healing part. Like I said, you need the and it's interesting that everyone is traumatized. That's kind of an interesting thing that struck me recently. Billions of people on the planet, and we're all traumatized. There must be a significance to that, and there certainly is, and that's part of the awakening process.
So could we speak to that? When your experience has revealed the traumatic syndromes that exist within our peoples around the planet, are there common tendencies in
Yes.
your experience for what trauma is based on?
Right. Just from a sort of a statistical survey thing, there's a famous ACERS adverse child experience survey in the 1990s. Many people have heard of, where they had about 10 plus experiences people have that would traumatize them. Things like loss, neglect, abuse, your parent being in prison or hospitalized or divorced, these kind of common things. And they found out, and this was a middle class survey in the 1990s, that about 2/3 of the people at least had one of those areas of trauma. And then if you extend it out really more, because that's much more limited, I mean, were your parent, did you have to be a mini parent? Did you have to be the parent for your family? Did your parents have poor boundaries? And it kind of goes on. And I don't know if you'd call them all, quote, traumas, but certainly if you were living in poverty too, or, a war zone, or it goes on and on. So there's just all these things that are part of the, quote, the human experience. So there must be a reason for that, besides the plight of the planet Earth and the fine mess we've gotten ourselves into, for awakening.
Yeah. And what do you feel the reason is?
It seems to be a good spur, a good stimulus, a good challenge to keep us alert. It's something to focus on. So kind of like our mess becomes our message, that idea. So those are the very things that sometimes when we're too comfortable, become complacent, things are going too smoothly, like, wow. And then there's the hurt inner child, my inner orphan, am I going to be abandoned? Am I going to be completely lonely? Am I hurt? Failure child, is this going to be a failure? And these are common things that myself and clients and people around the world have. You deal and nurture them. So how do you do that? Well, that's part of the awakening process, maturing. And hey, if I have a higher mission and I'm here to comfort myself and give compassion and love I have to give it to myself so I can then give it to the world, right? So we're sort of a test case, and we build that so we can function more in the world in a loving way.
So the original trauma is really what is referred to existentially as the original sin, isn't it? And it's our movement away from the divine, the separation from the divine. That's what has begun the trauma. And of course, what we're talking about is that we're seeing the constructive nature of healing as being a way back to wholeness.
It is.
Healing is a movement back to wholeness, a movement back into the all-oneness that truly exists at source level.
Mm-hmm. And that, I don't know if that is the technical definition of healing, is wholeness, but it is going back to wholeness and oneness. And it seems like it's something that we need to be sort of broken and fragmented so we can put ourselves back together, like that T.S. Eliot, I'm going to know the world, but for the first time, because I have all these rich experiences that I've undergone. So we're wiser.
So much of the behaviors that we see, particularly through the beginning of the 20th century and now the 21st century, have been fragmented as a result of societal conflict, and then all the extrapolating features in relation to societal conflict. But of course, at the same time, there's always this feeling of hope. There's always this feeling of redemption and saving. When you look into the core of your own energy healing practice, are there common denominators that arise? Meaning, are there common syndromes that arise as you begin to define how you can assist a dear one into fuller healing?
A lot of them fall under sort of general categories of perfection and procrastination. And the reason why we try to be perfect someday never comes, that day when all the kids are right, when I have all the money and when I have all the time, etc. And then we procrastinate, we put things off too. And it's that fear of failure, that this time, I'm going to be rejected. And some of this really is a lot of past life stuff. If you look at all the punishment and cruelty and torture, and then people who've been burnt at the stakes and killed in Atlantis and so on and so forth for speaking their truth, trying to share the light and the love. A lot of that is really in people's consciousness. I know it's been in mine to a degree, and many people I help. It's certainly strong in my wife, where you have these past life or even present life abuses that, hey, if I speak out, I will be imprisoned again. Hey, I will be tortured. I will be killed. So part of it is coming from a soulful place where you're not foolhardy, where you're not just jump in and do foolish things and kind of really attract abuse, but do it intelligently and realize there is going to be some criticism and rejection for people like us. That's why we're having these deep dialogues to mind meld and illuminate the world.
Yeah, to help create a new hierarchy of values, because our past values are palpably, evidently, no longer useful. As we see the divisiveness, the division that's around, the lack of cohesion, and the fact that there is only a certain group of people that make all the choices, and they hold a testament towards their own collective sovereignty. And as we see, we're all moving towards the development of our own personal divine sovereignty. And I believe that's one of the great gifts that, for example, the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, that she is, by her passing, giving us permission to really consult our own personal sovereignty through the dispersal of her energy, because at the moment, this nation and possibly other nations around the world are in a form of traumatic grieving, where we begin to measure our loss and then move through redemption into figuring and ascertaining our gain, which is about our own personal development of power, using the stimulant of her exemplary conduct, that we always saw grace, that we always saw kindness, that we always saw care, that we always saw dignity, these extraordinary virtues that often we do not see. For example, all we have to do is reflect on not necessarily the conduct of your own present president incumbent, but the gentleman that was before, that often we didn't see a dignified way of being. We saw something else, which was very contentious. But when you go into the core substance of your healing, what sort of techniques do you use? I'm sure that's quite a difficult question to answer, because it all depends on the level of healing that you're part of with the dear client that comes. But do you have particular techniques?
Yes, we have very specific, some of which we've developed, my wife and myself, over the last 25 years. We do a form of an emotional freedom technique we call a holistic version, which is tapping energy points for balancing the system. I'm tapping the points. And that's one thing that we teach and use. And another one is something we call spiritual kinesiology, which is a healing from the soul. And those soul centering methods that I mentioned earlier, we use those on ourselves and other people. It's kind of a meditation of being in the moment and opening your heart. And as you open your heart, I'm kind of doing it now, and you're feeling more energy and awareness and relaxation, you can kind of connect with that bigger picture. I'm kind of doing it now, and you're feeling more of the oneness. And I'm going to include the grace and kindness that you were suggesting, and those kind of higher qualities. You're feeling that more, you're opening. And sometimes words like relax, just simple short words, okay, let go, those kind of things come in, and you feel more expansive and connected and at one with everything. And when you're in that state, and you can start to heal, you can start to look at the division in yourself, the hurt inner child, the orphan, the failure, etc. And you apply that energy, and incredible things happen, Stewart. I mean, we've had people who've meditated for years because, say, I'm thinking of one person, her friend went into a business and embezzled funds for her best friend. And then 7 years meditating, nothing happened. And she did this process of opening up to her soul, her deeper self, her greater presence. And with that, the light of that, she was able to accept and forgive immediately in the moment.
And accept and forgive herself.
Yes, and her friend. You first all have to really accept and forgive. Well, it's in tandem that you have to do both. One comes with the other. They're interconnected. Yeah. You have to forgive yourself as well as the other person who transgressed in this point, knowing that you've transgressed against other people as well.
Yes, yes. And what was the core reason for why the embezzlement took place?
I don't remember the details, but it's just one of those situations where people took a bad turn, where you thought this person was your best friend, and we talked about the problems in the world. Greed, power. That's a lot of it. Why there's so much corruption and lower values playing out rather than the higher values, and people just succumb to temptation and addiction.
It's an interesting manifestation, isn't it? The embezzlement of manipulating a situation to draw out money so that it becomes oneself. So presumably right at the very core is the wound of scarcity, of lack.
Right.
That these people have more, this corporation has more money than I do. And money connotes with happiness and joy rather than, well, actually, who is free here? Interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you were mentioning earlier that you often take the individual back into past life memory. Do you feel that all the wounds that we have an astral or past life root?
I don't know if I could make a general statement to say all. I'd say some of them, and their patterns. And you may or may not need to go to a past life. I think it's actually kind of rare to need to do it, but it sometimes just comes up naturally, although some people might want to look at that specifically. And if you go into things like the Akashic records and so forth, you can sort of see the big picture through other lifetimes. But generally, a lot of it can really be done usually in this lifetime because the pattern has repeated itself. And it's sort of the same thing over again. I have this fear of blank, I have this abandonment thing. I have this power thing where I'm either disempowered or trying to control other people, or they're trying to control me. So the patterns repeat themselves. And it's interesting when you see them in someone else, you can be sort of objective and hopefully compassionate and not judgmental, but it's hard to see them in yourself, especially without someone helping you to get at some of these deeper core issues.
Yes, I guess it depends on the quality of thought, doesn't it, in the one who is awakened, meaning that are we illumined enough to be able to observe the patterns of our own conduct, the misfiring behavior around us, and that if we're non-reactive, we can begin to see that whatever we see on the outside of us is a mirror image of what's going on within, so we can start taking responsibility. And when you begin to define whether it is actually stimulated by past life trauma, are there particular awarenesses that you bring in to help steer the dear one into a great, deep, and profound discovery?
Well, the reason to go into a past life, if I'm working, say, with someone individually, would be there's nothing seemingly occurring in this lifetime to connect. And I'll just use myself as an example, a past life example. I used to have seasickness. I would be very dizzy on like a merry-go-round, or if I went out on a boat and it was a rocky waters. And I don't remember anything in this lifetime. There was no traumatic thing on the ocean or anything. So I just went into a past life, and I saw an image of a sailor going down with the ship. And sometimes just the past lives, just seeing things is all you need. It's often all you need is just to get the awareness. And then after that, the reason why I knew it worked, and it's hard to know how exactly biographical or historical all that was, but what I do know is after that, I've really never had any seasickness before. I went to Hawaii after that, was on one of those quartermans, those rafts that were on the waters, and it was very rocky waters, and I was fine. And before, I would have been really sick. In fact, someone else in the boat afterwards was kind of throwing up on the side after this water trip. So I know it worked. And that was proof for me. And that's what happens to other people. You shift by becoming an awareness when you're ready to do so. And it's just interesting that you're just kind of, the time is right and the fruit falls from the tree, so to speak.
It's an interesting phenomenon, isn't it? And of course, it comes up in my healing practice over the last 45 years that I've been working through, as a healer, as an empowerer, as a way shower. That as soon as we go into the crystallization of what the memory is and work through the process of alchemy, that automatically the person literally just steeps in whatever the issue is, because it's much more to do with the theme than it is to do with the story, isn't it? The theme is based on a profound feeling state.
Right. And that's the core pattern. So the story, which is a pretty powerful idea that many people are beginning to understand, you can change your story, your life story. In fact, as you go into your purpose and the veil lifts and you get more cosmic connections, your story will change and you will reinvent yourself. But you can interestingly change your story. Like, I'm a person who fails. I'm the person that never works out, whatever the contract, vow, pattern, you can change that. But you have to do it sincerely. And if there's some traumas and healings, you have to release some of that energy, like doing that soul opening and seeing it from your soul, where things can be very different. And that comes back and embeds in your everyday reality. So you change your story. Raise your alchemy, to use your term, probably.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's just hoodwinking self, isn't it? And that develops another program.
Just mimicking, saying the words. And
yeah. So when we look at the fundament of what you're leading us to within the healing of the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual bodies, so that we experience a fuller fusion with soul and therefore with source, what sort of common elements do you find coming up within the people that come to see you?
One of the basic challenges people have is they're not centered. They're uncentered. They're confused. They're overwhelmed. And we were talking in the pre-chat about, what is my purpose? Where am I? What am I to believe? What am I to do? There's so much out there. There's a lot of shiny objects. And when you get centered in your soul, which is one of the main things we teach and we help people with individually and in groups, then everything makes sense. There's a lot of things you can't understand, but you can know. And you follow that knowingness, that deep sense of who you are in your heart and what your next step is. You don't have to know really too many steps, maybe just your next step you can know, and you don't know the outcome, although you might have some goals and you want to be open and flexible. And then when you have the challenges, hey, like you said, this isn't working, something, I need to heal something. I need to find out something, like, why isn't this working? That's not that you're a failure, that you need to learn and grow there.
And speak to the substance of failure.
Right. So sometimes I kind of call it, a lot of people do, the 3D world, the conventional status quo world. You're supposed to be successful. You're supposed to have status. You're supposed to have a certain amount of income and friends and success and outer approval and trappings. And the trappings are fine and they're useful and they can be pleasurable. But you're measuring yourself by external measures. And this is the big and, Stewart, and everyone, your past programming. As a child, we're just a vessel for programming, although we come in with a soul and a lot from coming in from other lifetimes. But especially as a child, when we're getting often traumatized too, we're getting programmed by our parents, who of course were programmed too, and society. And that gets repeated like jingles in our head. And it's another way of programming ourselves. So we need to sort of deprogram ourselves. And how do you do that? You do the energy healing and connect with your soul, so you're living your purpose in your own life on your own terms without controlling everything or trying to control things, but taking charge of your life and helping awaken yourself and the world to a higher way of being.
And this being a young receptacle, so to speak, for the pollutions of the world to enter in, is there anything, obviously when we're children, we're innocent, and we're just simply cascading through life and looking at our caretakers and our caregivers as being responsible and sensible, civilized beings, which they're often, as we know, with deep trauma, they're not. But as we do this, is there any way that we can begin to alter the process when we begin to realize, because my experience was, and a lot of the people that I've worked with as a child, was that there's a deep level of sensitive knowing that you can't trust this person, but you can trust that person. And it's based on pure sentience. It's not based on cognition. It's a feeling. Is there any way of being able to alter the process so that the level of pollution isn't as extreme?
When you say pollution, what do you mean by pollution?
Fear.
Oh, fear of just fear of not knowing who to trust, or fear of others in general, or fear of
Well, I mean, for example, I as a child was much more in contact with the multidimensional universe than I was with 3D. And when I went to school, I couldn't read and I couldn't compute. And so I was told persistently, you are nothing and you will always be nothing. And because this was the 50s and just after the Second World War, the way that you educated the child to make it more intelligent was by beating them up. So I was constantly being hit with a stick called a cane. I was always being punished. So actually what I learned to see was a way of connecting with those people who I could see were inherently kind and compassionate and loving. Unfortunately, there were some. And the people who were dark, who just wanted to punish me, I just didn't go near.
Well, you shared a nice story, a vulnerable story and a pathway from your own biography there, which was really wonderful. But I think it reminds me of that story somewhere I had heard where children are often very aware of their past lifetimes and other multidimensional levels. And one child said to the other, I'm afraid I'm forgetting, I'm afraid I'm losing, and I'm afraid I'm going into in this other world. It's this thing, you're on this precipice of going into the 3D reality. But I think if you can remember the goodness, and it is a thread, and it's a journey, why did you choose your parents who abused you? If that's true, which I believe it is. So it's there to teach you something. And from the other side, where you don't have all the physicality, which you came here to experience and explore, but you don't have all the pain and chronic pain and suffering and chronic disease, etc., it's going to look a lot more neutral. But while you're here, you have this chance for a few years while you're alive to learn and live and grow through it. And this takes us to the theme of the show. Remember your soul's role in the Great Awakening. As you awaken, especially since we're in the meta-crisis time where there's so many multiple crises happening, right, left, ecological, psychological, spiritual, so many divisions fomenting it, cultural, geographic, all these things, as you get more whole and healed, you become a really powerful force in your own life and to help others to radiate out that light. And that seems to me the best solution. I mean, some people are more doing specific tasks like ecology and so forth. But for a lot of us listening, we're healers and coaches and bringing in that light and energy in an authentic way.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Somebody is speaking about the fact that they love animals and other beings. I wonder what the other beings are. The animal, vegetable, and mineral kingdom, perhaps, but afraid of humans. Is there any particular advice that immediately comes to you from your experience and also, intuitively? Anything specific that comes up to help?
You mean for helping animals, or?
No, for helping this wonderful lady, Catherine Kitty Cat, who loves animals but finds that she's afraid of humans.
I see. She relates. Some people are more elemental type people, and they're just of that, which is an interesting thing to realize, that you might be more angelic, more elemental. There are people from their cosmic origins, which is the veil. If you start to see, like, I'm just sort of more this is sort of my cosmic tribe. It doesn't need to be a source of divisiveness. It may be a friction. It may be part of her challenge in this case for her awakening, for what she's dealing with. So if she can see it as a gift and something she can use to help and heal, rather than react to the sometimes the brutality and coarseness of life.
Yeah, because it would be interesting. We can't really go into it because Catherine is not verbal. She's only written of understanding more about what the painful. She writes huge challenge, painful about the nature of humans because.
Yes.
I sort of identify absolutely with
Sure.
what she's sharing because human beings, I've learned to love human beings, but some of them can be really naughty and vicious, and I just don't stay around them. But I love animals because they provide us with unconditional love. And of course, that, particularly, oh gosh, I mean, cats can be very independent, but dogs are just so gorgeous. They're so amazing. I've been pining for a dog
We
and
have two
also
dogs.
dreaming about horses. Do you love pets? Or do
Oh,
you
yeah,
have
we have two
love?
dogs. We generally have had dogs for many years. We love them. They're back in the background of my home office here.
And what is it about dogness that you receive?
Just the unadorned loyalty and love and non-judgmental connection they have with humans. It's so endearing. It's so moving. Uh, it's so touching. It's just a wonderful energy to have, and just to feel their presence. And I feel like we're helping them evolve too in the exchange,
Yes, yes.
having a deep dialogue with them, I guess,
Yeah, exactly.
in a different way.
And earlier you were speaking of the meta crisis. Perhaps you could illuminate more, in a more inflated or just giving it a little bit more volume. What do you mean by the meta crisis?
Yes, that's a term that's come about where there's this overlapping, interconnecting global crises that are ecological and spiritual. And they come from all these divisions that are fomenting and rising up in society that we're aware of: cultural, geographic, racial. There are all these divisions. And what kind of came to me, which I was sharing with you earlier, is that the key of the polarity, the way of maybe addressing it, a very practical way, is learning how to be, on the one hand, more accepting, and on the other hand, standing up. Again, it's not either or, it's both and, in the right way. So accepting, loving what is, sort of more feminine, nurturing, accepting things instead of resisting things or just accepting things non-critically. I mean, the Taoist thing of letting things take their course and surrendering, like, that's a wonderful thing to do in the right way. But if that's all you're doing, you could end up with your head in the sand and not realize, hey, it's like Nazi Germany and we're just saying everything's fine, and something, terrible forces are on the rise, and we need to take a stand in the right way, the more masculine, focused energy to have the world progress. In this case, the Great Awakening. And I know there's been a lot of doomsdayers, and you have to do it in the right way so you don't become a true believer, fanatic, self-righteous person. Stand up. And I know there's been a lot of doomsdayers and end of the earth kind of things throughout history. But the reason, Stuart, I realized this time it really is something true, although the world has ended itself, I believe, in Atlantis and maybe earlier. So it is possible. But this time with the climate crisis, it's scientifically showing that we are risking extinction. We are risking really annihilation if we don't wake up and come together and think more globally and be more connected and soulfully aware.
Yeah. That is a big issue, isn't it? The substance of climate change and how the organism on which we live is moving into a state of endangeredness. What do you feel that this is a reflection of?
I think it's just like we have these patterns we personally deal with, collectively on the earth, all the divisions, all the survival, like the fight or flight. We're in fight or flight rather than live and thrive. I mean, a certain amount of life is fight or flight. There's a place for that, but the survival, the instincts, the us versus them, that's been so inbred and so tribal and brutal and territorial throughout history. And I know there's progress because there's a lot more education and a lot less poverty, and in some ways less violence than in previous times. But because of the existential climate crisis and because technology has so outpaced spiritual development, we're not using technology enough for spiritually harmonious ways, we're at risk.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel, because you've mentioned Atlantis once or twice, do you feel that during the Atlantean times that we were living a much more integrated lifestyle?
Well, what I know of Atlantis, which I can't say is very much, but from what I've read and perceived inwardly, is it was a time of great advancement and connection and awareness until some of the same mistakes were done there of getting technology overriding spirituality, and too much profit, too much greed, corruption, and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, I have. I mean, the beings of light that came to me 35 years ago are called the Angels of Atlantis. So I've written books about Atlantis and have, through their teachings, have a lot of experience of it. And I often feel that we misinterpret the nature of Atlantis because, after all, we were living more than a double helix DNA. And when we're living a more than a double helix DNA, our perceptual field is infinitely greater than perhaps we have at the moment. And so therefore our choices and our decision making is vitally different. However, it's obvious that something huge happened, as we have seen through other prior civilizations, Mu, Lemuria, that, in other words, civilizations rise and then they fall. Obviously, our civilization rose and now it is falling, and we're building a brave new world. And of course, this is the creation of what Deep Dialogues is all about, as a contribution to the way that we can develop Brave New World. I'd love to go back to really speaking to the nature of the way that as we grow, as we evolve, we're becoming much more sensitized within our physical fabric to the possibility of what soul is, and that feeling is the language of the soul. And of course, dear Catherine earlier was talking about her fear of humans and the ease that she feels with wonderful animal kingdom. What do you feel? What sort of advice can you provide we empaths with when we're immensely highly sensitive, so that we don't stick our heads in the sand?
Right. Like sometimes it just seems so painful. Sometimes it's just doing a little bit at a time. Maybe exposing yourself or introducing yourself to something that's a little more challenging or difficult, instead of doing an all or nothing approach, which we tend to do when we're fearful or have a problem. We have to say, well, I have to completely accept people and deal with people, even though I'm very sensitive and this environment is very hard for me. Maybe we're in the environment for 5 minutes. Maybe we have a very short conversation with someone that's uncomfortable, but we keep it short. Do little baby steps, in other words. And then again, just connecting with the soul, and like the 12 DNA strands you were referring to earlier, connecting with the big picture. Your soul will connect you with the big picture if you are part of a collective soul, a greater soul, a universal soul, connecting with everything and everyone. Well, that's a different way of being in the world than saying this is very harsh and difficult and I can't handle it. Yes, take baby steps. Don't try to jump into the deep end when you can barely swim. Learn a little bit to swim a short distance or in the shallow end.
And interesting. So, and my immediate question is, how do we do this? Because after all, being empathic means that there's a high degree of sensitivity, and the world can often be a very hostile and cruel space. And so my experience empathically and observing dear ones who come to me who are also, they register themselves as empathic, that we move into a freezing or a numbing state, which is not a disacknowledgement of what's taking place. It's just that there's nowhere else to go because it's so painful to move outwards. We tend to freeze the inner and the outer perceptual field so that it's difficult to initiate any other action. So we just move into a terminal state of disempowerment. Is there anything that perhaps you can specifically refer to from your own skill set that would help an empath who is frozen to become easier with the world?
protective, sounds like a protective measure that you're describing. Well, I could suggest this as a possibility, not something I've directly tested out, but we know that this little mantra we discovered has been very effective. And a lot of people who take our trainings I work with individually are very empathic and sensitive, as you might imagine, like yourself. And it's this little mantra we call the Miracle Reframe, and it's very empowering. We could do it now, and it's kind of
please do.
So this was the download we received years ago, this little saying. It's simply, anything is possible and miracles are happening now.
Anything is possible and miracles are happening now. That's beautiful. Anything is possible and miracles are happening now. Wow.
So say that when you're in this frozen protected state, and I'll give you one more add-on, which you could actually do pretty easily depending on where you are. It might look strange, the EFT tapping. So if you're tapping, and you could, if you want, and people could tap along the top of your head, and you're saying anything is possible, and then you're tapping your eyebrows, and miracles are happening now, and then the side of your eyes. These are energy circuits. Anything is possible, and under the eye, miracles are happening now, and under the nose, anything is possible. Under the chin, and miracles are happening now. On the collarbone point, anything is possible, and under the arms, miracles are happening now. And the last two parts, Stewart, is that we call the reset, where you're tapping the top of your head, which is the left and right brain integration. Anything is possible, and you take a breath, because breathing is very powerful too, as you know, through the nose, and slowly exhale. And last part, integrating in your heart, because it's all about being an open heart, and miracles are happening now.
Beautiful. Just and so many of the people listening in, I'm sure, are aware of the tapping phenomenon, but perhaps you could just address that unique skill that you've just introduced us to. Tapping means?
Tapping emotional freedom techniques. It came from a therapist in 1990, Roger Callahan, and he actually had a client who, and he was a therapist, he was having a session by her pool, and she had a phobia about water. And, and he was near the pool. And so he said, he just had a download, a hunch. He said, here, I want you to tap a couple points. He knew the meridian points. And he had her tap. And then she said, wow, I'm not afraid of the water anymore. And she went in the water. She was totally healed. And that was the genesis, based on, of course, acupuncture, the needles, but you do it with fingers, in this case, acupressure. And he developed 7 of these key meridian points to tap. And then his student, Gary Craig, who was actually an engineer in the 1990s, developed what he called emotional freedom techniques. And we adapted it and did some getting through some holistic processes added onto it. And he just did this universal overhaul technique of the points I'm tapping and saying an affirmation. And there's a lot of ways to do it, and there's a lot to it that can go very deep and precise. And so that has been really good for healing. So people can often heal things pretty quickly on the surface. But if you want to go deeper, you're going to need to have some more skill sets, which we teach, to go really through some of these deep traumatic things that are hard to perceive. But sometimes just little things or things on the surface can be resolved by balancing your system, kind of a reboot.
And so what exactly is happening?
It seems to be, the idea of acupuncture is the system has too much or too little energy. And then if you look at it, why does it have too much or too little energy? Well, part of it could be your physical things. You didn't get enough sleep, what you ate, you're dehydrated, etc. Or it could be even maybe deeper still, is what you're thinking, and these core patterns and these traumas coming out, and they're imbalancing your system. It's like you're saying, if you're in this highly sensitive state, your system is out of balance. So if you can bring it into balance, where anything is possible and miracles are happening now, you're in a much more resourceful, stable place to be in the world, but not of the world, rather than being lost in the world.
So by tapping the meridians, or rather the nodes that are connected with the meridians, what we're actually doing is stimulating oxytocin and serotonin within the body, which allows flow to take place. And the meridians become flowing, because when they're not in flow, there is a level of dis-ease or disharmony or disassociation. And that's where the holding point is created that brings about the manifestation of whatever we call it, trauma, fear, etc., etc. Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, we're moving into the last 10 minutes of our deep dialogue. And please do ask any questions in the chat box if you would like to. Yeah, Deborah has a question, I believe, about accepting. Accepting our life as an earthling is often difficult because why is it difficult? Because we came here, we didn't realize the totalities of the limitations of being on this planet. Limitations on this planet. I've never experienced any limitations.
What are you talking about?
Oh, it's interesting. So, you know, the wonderful people who are very alert immediately comes back to energy, because we're all energetic beings. So the level of acceptance, because you've spoken about it, I know we spoke in our pre-show chat, but also you've mentioned the word 4 times recently. So perhaps, I mean, it seems like a major program for you. Can you tell us more about the essence of acceptance?
Right. And it seems very paradoxical, like a lot of profound truths, and that's why our linear left brain mind has a challenge with it. And before I get into acceptance, I want to just say how we can learn how to accept the way we, I think, deeply can be in the world, but not of the world. And that is, first of all, opening our heart and our intuition, which connects with our right brain. And then we have this awareness, this knowingness, this download. And then we use our left brain. Then we come back and say, let's figure this out and be practical. And how can we strategize? How can we put it into action? So that's the process. We often go reverse, like we have to figure this out. We have to think it. We have to research it. We need to do the deep knowingness research and the deep feeling, heartfelt feeling. So that's how we approach it. That's the sort of the strategy I understand. But acceptance, to answer your question or address it, is learning how to not resist what is in front of you. Like if this is happening, it's easy to be in denial, and that's okay for a while. It's easy to reject things. It's easy to hide your head in the sands. It's easy to just be a pleaser, just to not make waves. It's easy to control things. Those are ways not to accept, as opposed to allowing, going with things, surrendering, letting things take their course. And a lot of it is observing, listening, like this is really terrible. This is very cruel what's happening in the world. Like this is hurting my heart. I'm feeling very hurt, rather than reacting, what am I going to do? The world's coming to an end. I can't handle it. And that's adding on and being charged by it. It's one thing feeling things, there's another thing getting a reaction. So the idea by accepting is then you are allowing and able to respond instead of react. So you take it in without letting those hurts, those traumas we talked about earlier, the failed child, the orphan child, all those little parts of ourselves that are patterned and traumatized, and healing those, to accept it. So I'm going to go with it and learn from it and grow from it and deal with it in a practical, healthy way. And it may be challenging. It might not succeed every time either, and that's okay.
Just to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, if there are any questions that you would like to ask, Philip is here and is very available, as you can see, to bringing us remarkable information. So acceptance is about yielding and surrendering. In other words, releasing resistance.
Right. And when when you can do that, then you can be more in your purpose and take action and take a stand, that other part of the polarity or the paradox. So the more you can accept things, paradoxically, the more you can do things in a soulful, practical way, in alignment with your purpose and your soul's plan.
And so to release the resistance, which is based on fear, a fear of being violated, a fear of being traumatized, a fear per se. We need to go into the fear first. Otherwise, there is no way really anybody can yield or surrender, because all they're doing is yielding and surrendering to further resistance. And that, that becomes an opaque mess, doesn't it? So if we go into the fear, we can release the resistance, and that's what
you want to release it. And it doesn't make it's okay or approving someone who's transgressed or violated us or our own transgressions or violations. It's not saying that's okay. It's letting it go, learning from it in the past and moving forward, making the world a better place.
Yeah. And earlier, I know you've addressed it throughout, sort of peppered throughout our conversation and deep dialogue. You've talked a lot about purpose. Could you perhaps illuminate for us the conviction of purpose in your understanding?
We have, Stewart, a little formula for purpose, which sounds crazy, to have a formula for your purpose, which is so profound and multidimensional. But it seems to work over the years that we write about and teach. And it's very simply taking your gifts and talents, the ones that you like your voice and the way you use your voice, for instance, to give you as an example, and using that to make the world a better place. And the second part is, how would you like the world to be a better place? You'd like the world, just if you don't mind answering, you would like the world to be more, what adjectives would you use?
Oh, harmonious.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So you can use your voice and talents and your other talents to make the world a more harmonious place, just to have like kind of a brief use of this formula of taking your gifts and talents and to make the world a more harmonious place, or whatever motivates you.
What do you do with somebody who says, I don't know what my purpose is?
Well, then we could just say, what do you enjoy doing? What are you good at? And it might take a few moments to say, because sometimes it's so close to us, we take it for granted. Do you enjoy researching things? Do you enjoy serving people? Do you enjoy some kind of artistic endeavor, art or music or something? What is it that you enjoy doing? How do you get in the zone? What just seems like fun to you? The irony is that's the thing that's your purpose. It's the thing that you enjoy the most. It's hiding in plain sight. You mean I'm not supposed to struggle and be in fear and pain and have to go through hell and high water to get my purpose? No, you can actually start doing the things you enjoy right now.
It's interesting, isn't it? The levels of distortion that we've received, particularly from outside commentary. And actually, it's much simpler than we all thought it was.
It is. You don't have to suffer unto the truth. You can enjoy and sail and create.
It's all about love and joy. Well, are there any questions, ladies and gentlemen? I see you're all very, very quiet out there, making lots of observations about your own processes. But do you want any extraordinary truths to drop down from Mount Olympus? Because we have a God sitting in front of us who's been, teaching and healing people for many, many years. Here we go. What do you say about the children who have not been traumatized by this whole pandemic and don't know how to deal with the world mentality and socially when spirituality isn't something they believe in? Wow, that's a very convoluted question. What do you say about the children who have been traumatized by the whole? So what do we say about the children that have been traumatized by the pandemic?
Right. So the pandemic is a challenging period that children have gone through, just like children have gone through other things like we have gone through. So again, people have difficulties. If you can be a model yourself as a parent or an adult and person in this life, in other words, if you can heal yourself, if you can be on purpose yourself, you're going to have that intuitive knowingness, as I said, opening the heart and the right brain and then figuring out what to say and do. You can really help everyone, including your children and people closest to you.
Yeah. My answer is that I'm intrigued by what their trauma is, and what I would want to do is to allow them to feel that they are loved and that they can have belief, faith, and trust, the three concomitants of love, in the whole substance of the fact that they are absolutely extraordinary. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I want to say, Philip, thank you so much, and to all the wonderful people who have tuned in. I know not just simply in the moments that we're recording, but coming into all the other future people that are listening in. Maybe there are even past people listening in, if we're distorting time. Philip, are there any projects or books that you would like to immediately draw people's attention to before we complete?
Yes, we have a little free spiritual healing kit, which has an excerpt from our new book, The Loving Power of Your Soul, and a holistic EFT, a tapping video, and some spiritual resources. And I can give a tiny URL out to it. It's at our gettingthrough.org/holistic website, but they directly can go to it at a tinyurl.com/spiritual-kit, at a tinyurl.com/.
Oh my God, that sounds so complicated. So do they go to your website first, do they?
Yeah, they at our website, there's like a free kit they'll see, and that's something people
Amazing.
enjoy.
Amazing. Okay, everybody, there's a free kit. Okay.
A download.
So make sure that you take down Philip's address, gettingthrough.org, and then you'll find that you're opening up a cave of magical proportions where all right at the very core is miraculous healing. And as I speak of miraculous healing, we will have to finish, but don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, that October 1st, 2nd, and 8th, I am running an equinoctial retreat. In other words, a retreat for the autumn equinox, which is called the Crystal Temple of the Angels of Atlantis. Come along and experience it. It's going to be the most amazing situation to raise your vibration and feel yourself drenched by the divine. Miracles are happening, Catherine. Namaste, namaste, namaste. Philip, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for making this available.
Bless you. Bless you. Ryan, thank you so much. Stay where you are, please, Philip.